now available on the SIBODoctor.com, the SIBO Success Plan, a course for people with SIBO to help educate and take action. Whether you're working with a practitioner or are battling SIBO out on your own, this course will teach you how to beat SIBO for good. Visit thesibodoctor.com for more info. Welcome back to part 2 of the SIBO Doctor podcast, and let's jump right back into it.
This is going to lead me to bacterial resistance. Is that okay, Narala, or are we going too far?
Well, I mean, just as a reminder, we are so used to berberine containing plants for SIBO, so we're definitely no strangers to also essential oils like oregano oil, that's used for fungal and for bacterial infections. I'm finding people are starting to get a little resistant to oregano oil. I don't know if you've noticed that as well.
Yeah.
But and using, I think I need to use clove a little more. I usually use it in other combinations, but it definitely, I think, has a lot of promise also for SIBO.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you even got forms like Nigella. Nigella is a nice high essential oil containing plant too. So there's so many to choose from. But when we look, why am I including these types of plants? I don't include a berberine plant every single time. And it's because we're trying to keep away from resistance. We're trying to keep away from bacterial resistance. And when I did that research, we're looking at 5 key resistant mechanisms. So things such as that bacteria have or present antibacterial agent with. So you're looking at purely and simply the cell wall. And again, understanding your pathogen really helps with treatment, because if you know that you're dealing with a gram-positive bacteria versus a gram-negative bacteria, that already tells you one form of resistance mechanism. So gram-positive is a single layer cell wall, whereas gram-negative is double layer. So you know that you've got higher resistance against a gram-negative and therefore a longer treatment and possibly higher dose.
And that's important. There's just getting it back to SIBO, for example. We've got a lot of organisms that are gram-negative, E. coli, Klebsiella, those types of Pseudomonas. They're all gram-negatives and have this infamous LPS in their cell wall that causes a lot of inflammation, actually. It's one of the most potent inflammatory substances that we know. So it's always important to, and sometimes we can't really determine what the infection is, especially with SIBO, because with a breath test, we only know that they're hydrogen producers or methane producers. We don't really actually know the species of bacteria. So sometimes that's a little tricky,
Yeah. But I guess in that case, I tend to think, expect the worst, expect the higher resistance, particularly for a chronic type of infection. I guess we can throw, I know you and I spoke about this at NHAA, even though SIBO is not technically an infection, it is kind of an infection when you look at what's happening there and what's happening with the immune system. Mm-hmm. So I guess I would always, depending on the vitality of your patient, assume that it's going to have some fairly high resistant mechanisms that we need to work on, which basically means dosing for longer and dosing for higher with regards to herbal extracts. So, gram-negative, I like to try and understand my pathogen first. If I can't, then I can't. But there's other things like efflux pumps. So they have this ability to pump out any negative antibacterial agent that pops into the cell. They can change the structure of an antibacterial agent when it enters the cell. There's several resistant mechanisms that just blow my mind. So therefore, what I'm thinking when I'm treating is that I can't show you the one antimicrobial or antibacterial agent. I actually need to show this bacteria several of those. And this is where the mixture becomes important. And this is where, when we talk about, which we'll probably talk about another time, but when we talk about an extract versus a single constituent. Mm-hmm. So, for example, you're talking about Coptis versus berberine. So there are definitely trials around this, and not just for this particular herb, but for many herbs where the whole herb, whether that be the root or the leaf or whatever part they're using versus that active constituent, we see greater results with the whole herb. And this is because of the synergy of constituents, right? That in nature, everything works well together. So when we're showing a pathogen several phytomedicines with several constituents, they're having to try and deal with that information in one hit. Mm-hmm. And the other key to that is that we don't show it for too long. We don't treat with a herbal mix for too long. So clinically for me, when I first see someone, they get one mix for 2 weeks and they get to take home a second mix that they start for the third and fourth week. So the rotation of those phytomedicines, the primary phytomedicines I'm talking about here, and what I mean by that is I'm talking about the antibacterial phytomedicines, herbal medicines, they get changed every 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So that's what I do when I start. When I see that we're getting results, I normally lengthen it out to about 3 weeks. So
let me just clarify. So you don't do that with viral infection?
No, not as much. No.
Interesting.
We don't tend to see the resistance as much. Although in saying that, we're obviously getting resistant viral infections now too. And so maybe I'll have to change clinically. But that I tend to keep a viral mix at least for a month, because what I'm really trying to target is for them is what their immune system's actually doing, as well as a broad spectrum antiviral.
Okay. All right. So if you go back to the 2 week, so the first 2 weeks, do you have sort of a plan what you want in the first 2 weeks versus the second 2 weeks, or is it just different herbs?
Continual improvement. Yeah, you just want to sort of see that you're getting some continual improvement. I think sometimes what will happen is that, and it's not necessarily a nice, beautiful, smooth line, particularly with people with chronic infections, but you do generally get these little creeps of improvement. And let's talk about, say, a gut bacteria or something along the lines of that. Treatment can take minimum 3 months. So it's quite a lot of cycling of herbal medicine. And it doesn't mean that I will use one herbal medicine in the first 2 weeks and never use it again. Absolutely not. It's more about the rotation. So, often that first mix will then get repeated in another month. So it's not like I'm exhausting all of my herbal medicines in that regard. I just find that we need to try and outsmart the bug a little bit, which is probably impossible, but we just can't show them the same thing because, like you said, you're already finding people a little bit resistant to oregano, for example. We can't. The way herbal medicine and plants is that they have all these beautiful components to them that work synergistically. So they should be able to target multiple resistant mechanisms on a bacteria each time we provide that treatment. But the idea is that if that bacteria gets used to that, then they'll be able to work against it or block it. So, yeah, that's why I like to change it in the initial stage every couple of weeks, hopefully seeing some positive results, which generally we do, and then I can lengthen it out a little bit more, if that makes sense.
Sure. So just so that I understand, so what would be an example of the first 2 weeks kind of antibacterial formula? Let's say somebody has... let's not start with Lyme and co-infections because that's like the mother lode of infections. Yeah. But, even like a strep or a staph infection, which is more gram-positive. Or let's start with a gram-negative one. So what would you do if somebody has, some gram-negative infection, let's say Pseudomonas, which is really difficult, right? Yeah. Lung infections, perhaps? Yeah. Perhaps.
So you just touched on it then. Actually, knowing the part of the body where the infection's likely to live at the moment or affecting is really important as well. So again, I try to combine a berberine containing plant with a high essential oil containing plant. So say it's in the lungs, I tend to start with Coptis because it's our highest berberine containing plant, that liquid plant that I have in my dispensary. So I tend to start with Coptis. I just will say a little bit about berberine if that's okay, so that people understand its systemic effects. Berberine is not traditionally a systemic antimicrobial, even though we do see it work in research for diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. But what we do know about berberine is that some of it will actually be eliminated by the eliminatory organs, all right? So we'll have some activity in those particular organs, so kidneys, urinary tract, lungs, skin, those sorts of things, liver. So we can think of it a bit like that, all right? It doesn't have to be just for the gastrointestinal tract and urinary tract. So I tend to use a higher one when it's systemic. So I'll use Coptis, and then I'll match my essential oil-containing plant pretty much with the condition. So if we're looking at lungs, I'll generally go for thyme. So I'll combine Coptis and thyme as an initial mix. And then I'll throw in most likely an immunomodulator that's really enhancing immunosurveillance. So, I might even definitely a cordyceps, like I like to say before. It might be something like a holy basil as well, which also contains more essential oils. So I'm sort of doing a double whammy there. And the final ingredient that I'll put in is what we call a synergist. So a synergist in herbal medicine basically means that we're improving the activity of that primary phytomedicine. So the primary phytomedicine in this mix is my antibacterial, so thyme and coptis, and we're improving the delivery of it. So you're looking at things like ginger, licorice, greater galangal, any of those sort of phytomedicines like red root that might affect the delivery of it. I use a lot of
red root.
Red root's brilliant.
It's so good. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I would make that first mix. And then not a lot changes. Like berberine might come out for a little while, and I might throw something like a nigella in, which is a nice high essential oil plant as well. And then I just change them around. And, sometimes it doesn't have to be, particularly because you can run out sometimes of the primary ones that you're using in terms of antibacterial. I might use Astragalus. And why might I use Astragalus? Because I know it's going to stimulate my Th1 cells. So I know it's going to fight against, help the immune system fight against this infection. So that's generally how I start with my antibacterial mixes. Couple of primary antibacterials, immune modulators, and a synergist.
Fantastic. You talked about Astragalus, and also I think Astragalus is another one of your favorites.
Astragalus, yeah, it is.
I always say it the American way still, because that's how I was trained. Astragalus is Astragalus. Oregano oil is oregano, that's just. I don't think it'll ever change in my mind. But and there are some herbs like those that like Astragalus that are great for both virus and bacterial infections, aren't they?
Definitely. Yeah. And I guess that's primary because they don't necessarily, their activity when you look at them are not necessarily directed like, say, clove is directed against the pathogen. What it is actually directing your immune system to fight the pathogen. So, that's where Astragalus, Astragalus, Echinacea, these wonderful phytomedicines should never be ignored. They have a place in this mix as well. Echinacea is also a great immune modulator. The only time I query using Echinacea is when I'm dealing with an autoimmune condition. Everything else, Echinacea fits beautifully in. I love it.
And let's kind of briefly talk about that, because that is something that I think still has a lot of mystery around it as to what herbs to use when you're using when you have an autoimmune patient, which I personally don't have that level of concern so much with Echinacea. I think that's, because I don't use it very long. I don't use it chronically. So more for acute situations, but
that's it. It just hit there.
Yeah. So there are some do's and some don'ts, I guess, with the prescription of herbal medicines that must be understood, because you don't really want to stimulate an aberrant immune response.
This is it in particular, yeah. And look, just on Echinacea, that's where the jury's out. And I think for me clinically, it's been a bit of trial and error, which sounds terrible, but it's with some patients, Echinacea is okay, and with some it's just absolutely not. And I think the only time I tend to use Echinacea in autoimmune is exactly what you mentioned before, is when I'm dealing with an acute infection. So that's the time I'm happy to trial it and bring it in for a particular patient. But also, just so we're clear as well, the clinical trial research around Echinacea is confusing in terms of autoimmune disease, and it's not clear cut. So we have some trials that say, hey, this worked well. This Echinacea was great here. And we have others where that just, it didn't work well. We have an elevation of symptoms and what have you. So for me, it's
interesting.
Kind of, it's just based on your clinical experience, but you do have to look at the research a little bit with regards to that. So anything that's stimulating immunity, bacteria, for instance, even sometimes cat's claw, sometimes, even though it's a great anti-inflammatory, but you're thinking of these, and Astragalus, immune stims, even though they do work as immune modulators. You just, pick your moments is the best time to say it. Pick your moments of when you're going to use it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, so let's also think about think about mucosal, it's like innate immune support. So specifically around increasing secretory IgA, which of course is such a wonderful immunoglobulin. I always talk to my patients like it's kind of like the samurai in your mucosa, and it's the first line of defense against any sort of infection, whether that's digestion or even bladder or lungs or whatever that may be. Wherever there's a mucosa, you have your secretory IgA that's there to protect you. And in many that are chronically ill, chronically stressed, or have a secretory IgA deficiency, that is one of the main reasons why they have potentially also SIBO. So can you kind of help us think about some herbs that can specifically, I mean, I know I have my favorites, but I just want to hear from you. What do you do?
I'd love to know your favorite. This is one thing I haven't done a lot of work on with actually is the secretory IgA.
Well, there aren't that many, but specifically I think of Smilax or Sarsaparilla in the gut, and I think it's isn't it Polygonum in the lung, but there's one that specifically does it in the lung. So you know, and it would be great to know if there are any other.
Afternoon. I'm looking.
Yes, I came across that many years ago.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, well, I came across that many years ago, and for some reason I tucked it away. I may be wrong on the polygon. Like it's. I don't do so much with lung infections these days. I mostly do digestive infections, but there is one specific one that. I'll think of it, but I think it might. No, it's not Japanese knotweed.
No,
so then it's not that. It's it'll come back to me. I should have been prepared for this for my own question.
This is great for me. I'm going to look into it because this is fantastic. I guess with the secretory IgA too, it's the health of your lining, isn't it? It's the health of your mucosa. So that's where we look at some herbal medicines as well, such as Burr Marigold. So we know Burr Marigold is a great mucus support. Membrane tonic, I guess we can call it, but it's also antibacterial, so it's going to have a double whammy there. And the other one that I really like for particularly, again, we're talking mucosa, so localized, is Usnea, the lichen Usnea. Usnea is highly anti-inflammatory. I often have it in a little spray bottle, just straight. Sometimes I mix it with licorice, what have you, and just a little spray bottle, like 25 ml. And if I've got a sore throat or a dry throat, I'll just spray it directly onto my throat because it's that lovely mucilaginous, but it's a really great antibacterial phytomedicine, more so against gram-positive, but it does work against gram-negative. You just have to dose it for higher and longer. So I think you can't go past those two phytomedicines, particularly for the gut. Burr Marigold is definitely more systemic as well, so if you're looking at lung. The other things I think about when you think about mucous membrane and trophorestoratives is obviously golden seal. So golden seal is one of our traditional mucous membrane trophorestoratives and highly antibacterial in itself. A little side note with why we also rotate herbal antibacterials, particularly localized for the gut, is that, we have some phytomedicines that are selective with their antibacterial activity, and we know of those, such as green tea, for instance. We know that that's selective. We know that some of the mushrooms are selective. What I mean by that is that they're killing off the bad stuff, but they're supporting the growth of the good stuff. But unfortunately, with berberine and certain high essential oil containing plants, we don't believe that they are as selective. Right. So rotation in that level is really important as well. So don't think that, by using these plants, we're also just flat out supporting the good our healthy microbiome. We're not necessarily doing that. So I think that's really something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and that's something I often tell practitioners is that, or even my patients, they come and they've been on just many, many, many months of antimicrobials. And so just to be judicious, and this is one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you, is because my own focus has been more on immune support in the past 6 months or so. And the herb I was thinking of is not Polygonum, it's Pelargonium.
Okay.
For the lung.
Radio.
Right, Pelargonium.
Pelargonium for the lung. Yeah. Beautiful herb.
Sorry, it just came to me.
That's awesome. Yeah,
so that's enough. And I feel like the other way to sort of increase secretory IgA really specifically is adrenal support. Is basically because we know high levels of cortisol will reduce mucosal output of secretory IgA. So that, by definition, those adaptogens are really helpful, and anything that supports the enteric nervous system is also really, I think,
really
like
helpful.
nervines and things like that.
Yeah,
I do find that
definitely.
that's why we actually get sick very often when we're stressed, is because
Yeah.
our immune
Yep.
response goes down so drastically.
Yeah. When you stop and think about it too, Narella, like how many patients with SIBO do you see, or chronic infection do you see, that have great energy and aren't stressed?
Yeah, basically none.
It doesn't go, none. So, adaptogens, and that's why I love immune modulators too, because they generally are adaptogens. They generally are. So, they're a first line of treatment as well. Yeah, great. Yeah.
Wow, this is so helpful. Okay, so let's I wanted to talk a little bit about herbal medicines in terms of quality, because there are a number of practitioners out there that just basically prescribe the sort of combination products, the various combination products in pill or capsule form by, trusted product companies, or the internet. A lot of patients are listening, thinking, where can I get cordyceps, blah, 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 where can I make these mixes up? And so firstly, I want to say to those of you listening that are patients, herbal medicine is you need to be trained in order to really know what you're doing when you're putting these tinctures together. Some basic rules are there, like not mixing certain herbs together. So so I just wanted to put that caveat out there.
Yeah.
But generally, what would you say about, or talk to us about quality of herbs? How important it is for companies to actually test the herbs for different excipients and toxins and things like that, because these are medicines and they're
correct. Spot on. Spot on. And I think general public will often forget that. So, often you will see a patient that comes into your clinic that is chronically ill, that have tried many natural remedies. And bless them, because they're trying to heal themselves, which I completely understand. But the problem is that not everything's the same on the market, particularly with herbal medicine. And I think you need to do your research around the brands that you're using, even if you're purchasing a tablet formulation that is retail. So what I mean by that is that it's available to the public and it's not having to be dispensed by a practitioner. You really do need to do your research around it. And the thing with herbal medicine is what you said before, it is medicine. There are contraindications to using herbal medicine. So we can't just willy-nilly take something. We need to understand it. There's drug interactions, et cetera, which is why it is probably more so important that if you are taking herbal medicines, that you're actually having that prescribed by a practicing naturopath or herbalist or what have you, or integrative GP if they've done their research and training around it. But sometimes we even see formulations that have been investigated that aren't using the plant part that they've said that they're using, or they're not using the particular species of a plant that they said they're using. And that might not sound like a big deal, but it actually is a big deal. What we know of herbal medicine and plants is that they contain different constituents depending on the plant part, okay? And different species within a family of plants will also contain different levels of constituents and sometimes even completely different constituents. So understanding the brand that you're using and that it's a trusted brand is really, really important. And then I guess my understanding, I don't use a lot of retail product, but my understanding of those that are generally retail products in terms of herbal medicine mixtures, I guess, or tablet formulations, is that they tend to use bigger hitting herbs. So if you're looking at something that I'm thinking is going to be supporting you during flu season or something, they tend to use herbs such as Astragalus, the bigger Echinacea, those sorts of bigger type of herbal medicines. And I'm not necessarily saying that they are safe for everybody, but sometimes they're not necessarily specific, but they might do an okay job if it's a good quality brand at just supporting your immune system. Yeah. It's a difficult one, Narala, because there are that many companies on the market worldwide where they're sourcing their herbs from is really important. Yeah. That's something that I look into quite a bit because of my knowledge behind it. And you just really want to do your research on it. It's a difficult one to sort of go into more information about. I'm sorry, but without
no, I know
specific examples.
And I mean, in terms of overseas, when I look at American companies, I often we can talk about different brand names. It's my podcast. I can say these things. But I like, first of all, the organic ones. That's really important to me, is that they are organic herbs and that they only use organic herbs. I either grow them themselves like Herb Farm or Gaia and, those kinds of companies that are really trusted in America. Those are the only two that bizarrely come to my mind right now, but there are others. And here, we have really good companies that do due diligence, but they don't sell to just retail. They don't do that. So working with a trained naturopath, if you're somebody who does functional medicine, for example, and you don't know much about herbs, you might want to partner up with a naturopath that does have a dispensary of these herbs, that knows what they're doing. And so kind of co-managing a patient in that regard is really helpful. If you feel like you're not getting the results with the compounded products that you normally do, then sometimes really custom making these medicines it can be a completely different experience in my experience. So
absolutely. And that's herbal medicine is definitely a science, but it's an art form. So, it's understanding the herb, it's understanding the energetics of the herb versus the energetics of the patient. Like, I love it, as you can tell. I absolutely adore it. And the results you get, that's particularly when you have had someone that's been ill for a while, they just, within a week, they're feeling like they've just got that little bit more. They can see the light at the end of the tunnel when it was black before. So herbs can be quite profound, but they do need to be mixed and prescribed by people that are trained in the industry. And I love the idea of collaborative care. I think we have so many qualified practitioners in their own fields. And if we can start exploring a little bit more around this collaborative care model, then, we're just going to be better outcomes for our patients.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I have so many more questions, but I'm aware of the time on a Saturday morning. I'm so appreciative of your time.
I love it.
And I know that you're definitely an amazing herbalist, way better than I will ever be, because I have so many different, interests. And that's, it's just one of my sort of passions, but not as obviously passionate as you are. So it's always wonderful to have somebody like you on the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so can you talk just briefly about dosing, liquid tinctures, like there seems to be like sort of a standard in this country, but not every herb is dosed the same.
Correct. Individual herbs have their individual, what we call weekly dosages, which are anywhere from 0 to 100 mils, basically, that you can have in a week. We do have a varied idea around dosing in this country, and some of that's taken from our own training or English influence, as well as there's American influence with drop dosing and different things as well. So every practitioner is different. I tend to dose on the higher side. That just tends to be
I do too.
Me, and and the results you want to get. But I guess as a general summary, your dose has to match the patient and the disease. So if you're dealing something that's acute and fast and hard, then you dose high or higher and more often. Sometimes you have patients that are very sensitive. And so I might not even start with a herbal mix. They might get what we call a simple, so one herb that's dosed quite low, and just I'll see how they go over a period of time. So unfortunately, there's no real rhyme or reason. I think there's a very much a thought of school here that 5 mils 3 times a day with herbal mixes tends to be the standard. I could not tell you the last time I did a dose like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I also think that, let's think about our patients. How often do they want to take herbs? So unless they are acutely ill, I tend to do 2 doses a day, and they tend to be a higher dose. 10 mil twice a day. Sometimes if it is someone that is a bit more unwell, then they will get that 3 times a day. It might be 7.5 mils 3 times a day. And we talk about when we do that. Majority of herbal medicines should probably be taken with some food in the tummy, because sometimes they can be irritants and they can be upsetting. And don't forget, we are I'm dealing with alcoholic extracts. So that's something I think about as well.
Well, and I usually do. I mean, do you do that too when people are either, teetotalers, for example, that don't want any alcohol? I just tell them to put it in hot water, let the alcohol evaporate, or do you have any other tricks?
No. So when that happens, I tend to go for tablet formulations, and reason being is I don't want to play with the extracts with heat. So, and it's only because we're not 100% sure that the constituents aren't changed when we heat the product. So we know that when you get a bottle of liquid herb, for example, they'll say basically to keep it around that 30-degree mark. So if we're heating it higher than that, we're not sure what we're doing with the actual constituents. So I tend not to worry about that or do anything. I tend to go with tablet formulations. There's also some products on the market that are in juice concentrate, so they're alcohol free. Sometimes I've used them, but more so in a children's
I don't use them for like that. I find them too weak personally.
Correct. Yeah, great in kids, like little kids. I'm talking. My daughter, who's 17 months, gets the normal extracts, but she also does get some juice concentrate ones. There's a great brand that I like, which is Kiwi Herb, a New Zealand product. I tend to use that in kids a lot. But so for that reason, I tend to go with tablet formulations, because you might be dealing with. So I have some patients that are from West Australia and they work on mines, and they have to be 100% alcohol free. There's just no point even messing with that type of patient. So that's when I do go for tablet formulations, which I don't love
hard.
because I can't be as single. You can't be as specific.
Yeah.
But in saying that, for people that just choose to be alcohol free, I do talk about the amount of alcohol in a tincture and how much they're actually taking. It's not a lot. So it's, and you do have herbs that have a higher percentage of alcohol versus a lower percentage of alcohol. So any of our herbal medicine companies here in Australia will have a dosage chart that will say the percentage of alcohol in that particular herb. So that's also a great educational tool for your patients as well. Like, let's actually have a look at what we're getting here in a 5 ml dose. What are you actually getting? So it's thinking about that too. One more thing on dosing though is, and what I said with combining it with your patient and thinking what sort of energetics that patient is, but also what is their microbiome like? Because like with so many food sources and other sort of vitamins that we need our microbiome to be intact, herbal medicine isn't distinct from that. Herbal medicine is especially when you're talking about herbs that might have isoflavones and things like that in them, we need our gut microbiome to actually be metabolizing those constituents effectively so that we can get them systemically. So again, if you're dealing with someone that probably has a really poor or dysbiotic microbiome, then you might want to dose a little bit higher so that you're actually getting some more of that constituent into that person.
Okay,
does that make sense?
Yeah, let me just kind of rephrase that, because that was a really important point, is that and it comes back, I think, to the fact that we have evolved with phytomedicines. We have had them available to us and as medicines for millennia, for so long that I think there is a synergistic, like our cells understand phytomedicines and they understand that information. And so part of that understanding comes from the microbiome, which those are your beneficial bacteria that actually need to activate some of those constituents in plants in order for them to be systemically available. So I think that's a really important point, is that if you do have somebody that's not that responsive to herbal medicine, that may be the actual underlying problem.
Perfect.
Rather than the herb is not working.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. And how can you go around improving that? Yeah, and it might be as simple as trying a higher dose. It might be. Or you may need to change
that's a really good point. Yeah. Wow, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time on a Saturday.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Love it.
And it's kind of like, like when we're just talking, it's not really work. It's just
not at all.
Exchanging information. It's so good. So where can people find you? If they want to work with you, you know?
Well, as I said, my website's in the process of being built at the moment. So I'll continue with my old email that people can catch me on, which is healthygroundclinic.com.au at gmail.com. So healthygroundclinic@gmail.com. You can always contact me that way.
Okay, fabulous. I'll have them all of your contact information will be in the show notes.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that you can come back at some other point and we'll talk more about maybe parasites or...
Oh, stop it. It's too exciting. That would be wonderful.
Okay.
Thanks, Narala.
Thanks so much for your time, Julianne.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the SIBO Doctor podcast. We hope you found the information in this episode useful in the treatment of your SIBO patients. Thanks to our sponsors, SIBOtest.com, a breath testing service with easy online ordering, and Quintron, maker of outstanding breath testing equipment. Tune in again for another episode of the SIBO Doctor podcast. Thanks again for listening.